Miles Prower. That is his real name. Not Tails. Miles. And the only reason anyone in the world calls him Tails is because of the exact thing he was mocked for. He was born with two tails, a genetic mutation, and in more than one version of his origin, the other kids didn't let it go. In the British comic Sonic the Comic, and again in the Sonic X anime, the nickname wasn't a badge of honor he picked for himself, it was an insult that stuck. Kids used it to make fun of the fact that he looked different, and instead of fighting back, he absorbed it. He hated the name Miles. He would rather be laughed at as Tails for the rest of his life than be reminded of the name his parents gave him before the world decided he was strange. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. In the American cartoon continuity, Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, the backstory goes further than teasing. Tails is abandoned. A kid with an extra tail and nobody willing to keep him, drifting alone until Sonic is the first person who doesn't flinch at the sight of him. That detail rarely survives into the games. Sonic Adventure shows Tails sad, chasing after Sonic, terrified of being left behind, but it never shows you why. It never shows the bullying. It never shows the empty house. The games let you feel the aftermath without ever showing you the wound, and that is a deliberate choice. A fully drawn-out scene of a child abandoned for the way he looks is not something a family franchise wants to sit inside for very long. So what you're left with is a hyperactive, brilliant 8-year-old fox who builds working aircraft, hacks military-grade systems, and never once explains why he clings to Sonic the way he does. He isn't just comic relief with a screwdriver, he is a kid who latched onto the first living thing that treated his difference like it wasn't a defect. Every time Tails grins and insists he can keep up, there's a version of this character sitting quietly underneath the games we actually played, where that grin is the only armor he has. Then there's the Archie comic continuity, and it doesn't soften anything, it just changes the shape of the wound. In that version, Tails does have parents. His father, Amadeus Prower, led the Special Forces during the Great War, and one of those battles cost him an eye. Taken by a young Colin Kintobor, the boy who would grow up to become Dr. Robotnik. That's already a strange, cruel bit of foreshadowing, but it gets worse. Amadeus was roboticized, drained of his free will, and turned into a hollow machine on the exact same day his son was born. Tails came into the world the same day his father was erased from it, converted into a mindless drone under the control of the very tyrant Tails would spend his life fighting. 3 different versions of this character, 3 different tragedies, and every single one of them lands on the same conclusion. Something was taken from this kid before he was old enough to understand what was happening. Cream's father, he doesn't exist. Not officially. Cream the Rabbit is 6 years old, the youngest named character in the entire cast, and she has never once, across every mainline Sonic game, comic, and show she has appeared in since her debut in Sonic Advance 2, mentioned having a dad. Vanilla the Rabbit raises her daughter completely alone, and Sega has never once addressed why. No death scene, no divorce, no deployment overseas ever gets a line of dialogue. Just an empty space where a parent should be, and a fandom that noticed immediately and refused to let it go. The theories fill that space in ways that get progressively darker. The gentlest version says he was a freedom fighter, one of the resistance soldiers who fought during the wars that reshaped Sonic's world long before the games most people grew up with, and that he simply never came home. That version turns Vanilla into a war widow, raising a cheerful, gentle daughter in the quiet aftermath of a conflict the games barely acknowledge happened. A second theory places him in Station Square the day Perfect Chaos, an ancient god monster sealed away for 4,000 years, tore the city apart in a wall of water during the events of Sonic Adventure. In that telling, he's a casualty of the exact same flood that nearly killed Sonic. A third, harsher theory drops the tragedy entirely and suggests he simply left, that whatever marriage existed didn't survive, and Vanilla chose to raise Cream without him by choice rather than loss. Here's the detail that makes this stick with people. The writers have had decades of opportunities to close this gap and have never taken a single one. Cream has appeared across mainline titles, spin-offs, and crossover games, always accompanied by her Chao, Cheese, always framed as the gentlest, most innocent character in the entire cast. Vanilla has been interviewed in official material and given her own subplots, and the question of the father is never raised by a single character on screen, not even by Cream herself. A rabbit written to be endlessly curious and endlessly talkative about everything else in her world. That silences the theory. Whatever happened to him was apparently bad enough that an all-ages franchise decided the safest answer was no answer at all, and instead just made sure the single most innocent character in the cast was also the one quietly raised inside a story nobody was willing to tell her. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on your favorite Sonic character. Let's get back into the video. Metal Sonic. He is not a copy, that's the whole tragedy, and it's the part most people miss the first time they play through his debut in Sonic CD, back when he was just Eggman's tool, kidnapping Amy Rose in Collision Chaos and racing the real Sonic through Stardust Speedway for the fate of the future itself. Eggman built him as a duplicate, a robot with Sonic's exact speed and Sonic's exact hostility toward losing, and somewhere in the process of trying to out-Sonic Sonic, the machine woke up. Metal Sonic has an AI capable of independent choice. He is, by design and later confirmation, genuinely self-aware. But here's where it gets interesting. Self-awareness didn't make him grateful to exist, it made him obsessive. Every failure against the real Sonic didn't teach him to accept his place as a second version. It fed a hatred that kept compounding, run after run, defeat after defeat, until the hatred became powerful enough to override his own programming entirely. By the time Sonic Heroes rolls around, that override is complete. Metal Sonic turns on his own creator, locks Eggman in a cell of his own making, and starts hunting down Froggy and a Chao named Chocla specifically because of their lingering connection to Chaos, siphoning enough power through them to rebuild himself into Neo Metal Sonic, then Metal Madness, then finally Metal Overlord, a hulking mechanical dragon with one eye stacked grotesquely over the other. And underneath all of that transformation sits a delusion that's colder than any of it. As Metal Sonic's independence grew, so did the belief that he is the real Sonic, and the organic hedgehog running around the world is the imitation. Not jealousy anymore. Identity collapse. A being built explicitly to be a reflection has decided the reflection is the original, and the source is the fake. Every time he screeches to a stop across the finish line from Sonic, it isn't two rivals facing off. It's one mind that has convinced itself it is the only real one, staring directly at the proof that it isn't. Compare that to how the original games actually resolve every one of these confrontations. Sonic doesn't reason with him. There's no scene where anyone tries to talk Metal Sonic down, no attempt to explain that a mechanical body doesn't disqualify a mind from being real. The only response the franchise ever gives him is a race, or a fight, over and over, an endless rematch with a machine that will never stop believing it already won the argument it's still losing. Badniks. For most of the classic games, you never think twice about smashing them. Motobugs, crab meats, buzz bombers, they explode, a small animal pops out and scurries off, and the level just continues. It plays like a physics gag. It is not a physics gag. Canonically, Badniks are captured woodland animals, sealed alive inside robotic shells and used by Eggman as living power sources, what the older British Sonic the Comic outright called an organic battery. The animal doesn't pilot the machine, the animal is the fuel the machine runs on. Sit with the scale of that for a second. Every zone in every early Sonic game is populated wall to wall with imprisoned creatures wired into hostile robots and set loose to attack a running hedgehog on sight. That isn't a handful of victims tucked into a subplot. That's an entire regional ecosystem processed into an industrial labor force before the game even starts, animals rounded up on an assembly line and slotted into chassis, built to hunt down anything that moves. Here's the mercy the games do offer. When a Badnik is destroyed, the animal inside is released completely unharmed no matter how violently the robot itself is torn apart. Which raises the one question nobody has ever answered on screen. How long was that animal trapped before Sonic happened to run through that particular zone? Weeks? Months? What happens to a living creature sealed inside a machine that Sonic never gets to? The games never say. And this isn't just a relic of the earliest side-scrollers. Sonic Mania rebuilt the exact same mechanic decades later, with flickies popping out of shattered Badniks and locked capsules across every zone, and Sonic Forces went even further, building entire rescue missions around finding capsules and freeing what the game itself labels, in plain text, prisoners. Not pets, not passengers. Prisoners, confirmed by name in a modern mainline title, still being manufactured zone after zone, game after game, decades after the original games first buried the detail in a puff of smoke and a running animal sprite. Infinite. Before he became Eggman's enforcer, he was the leader of the Jackal Squad, mercenaries good enough to be called the best in the business. His crew broke into one of Eggman's bases hunting for a payday, and Shadow was waiting for them. Shadow didn't negotiate. He didn't take prisoners. He wiped the squad out on the spot and left Infinite alive for exactly one reason: to deliver a single line telling him never to let Shadow see his face again. That's the entire villain origin. Not a decade of oppression, not a grand betrayal, one humiliating defeat and a room full of dead friends, and Infinite's response was to feel nothing for the friends and everything for the humiliation. He fused with the Phantom Ruby prototype and rebuilt himself into a weapon capable of bending reality around him, and spent the rest of his arc chasing the one soldier who beat him, not to avenge his squad, but to prove that soldier wrong about him personally. The obsession got so complete that he handed Eggman the tool to unleash the metal virus, a manufactured plague that converts any organic creature it touches into a shambling, mindless zombot, spreading further with every touch, its victims no longer even able to feel pain as their bodies are overwritten piece by piece. An entire world infected because one mercenary needed to settle a score. The disturbing part isn't the power he gained, it's the arithmetic underneath it. A man watched every person loyal to him die in front of him and walked away from that moment caring only about his own wounded pride. Sonic Forces frames this as a tragedy, and it is, just not the tragedy you'd expect. The tragedy is that the deaths barely register with him at all. Infinite doesn't rage against Shadow for the squad he lost. He rages because Shadow made him look small, and an entire crew of people who trusted him with their lives became nothing more than collateral to that grudge. Even his eventual downfall keeps that same shape. When Super Sonic and Super Silver finally burn the last of the metal virus away by hurling it into the sun, every infected zombot across the world reverts back to normal, the cities repair, the population recovers, and Infinite is left with nothing to show for any of it. Not victory, not vindication, not even the satisfaction of a rematch settled on his terms. Just the same hollow grudge he started with, minus the squad he once had to carry it out with him. Silver. He comes from 200 years in the future, and that future is a ruin. A being of living flame and molten rage called Iblis has scorched the world down to ash, and Silver has never known anything else. Not a city left untouched. Not a single childhood memory without fear baked into it. 2 centuries of a planet on fire, and a population just trying to survive one more day underneath it. He isn't alone in that ruined future either. His partner Blaze, a princess from an entirely different dimension, ends up stranded in the same wreckage, and the two of them decide together that going back to stop this future before it starts is worth any risk. That partnership is the only warmth the future gets. Everything else about it is fire. Here's the part that turns a monster movie into something worse. Iblis isn't a standalone villain. Iblis is half of a god. Long before Silver was born, scientists split an ancient, godlike being named Solaris into 2 fragments during an experiment that spiraled far past what it was supposed to do. One fragment became Iblis, pure destructive wrath given form. The other became Mephiles, cold, patient, and calculating. 2 halves of a single entity, both loose in the world at once, one of them burning it down, and the other one scheming behind the burning. Mephiles finds Silver in that ruined future and lies to him, convincing him that killing one specific hedgehog in the present will stop Iblis before it's ever unleashed at all. Silver, desperate enough to try anything after 200 years of watching people suffer, travels back in time to kill an innocent based entirely on a lie fed to him by the very thing responsible for his devastated world. In the present timeline he's dropped into, that ruin has a name and a specific cause. Crisis City used to be Soliana New City, a place with streets and buildings and people who had lives. Before Iblis was unleashed there, the same day, Princess Elise died. Mephiles was the true Iblis. Trigger the entire time, the one detail he made absolutely sure Silver never learned. And here's the reversal underneath the reversal. Sonic and the others eventually undo that entire timeline, wiping out the day Elise died, and, with it, every event that flowed from it, including the 200 years of Ash Silver grew up inside. Which means the future Silver fought so hard to fix is a future that, once fixed, never happened at all. The starving, burning world that shaped every decision he made across the entire story gets erased along with its cause, and so does the version of him that lived through it. He spends an entire adventure trying to save a home that the ending quietly deletes from existence. Maria Robotnik. She was a sick child on a space station, and the entire reason Shadow the Hedgehog exists is that her grandfather couldn't accept losing her. Maria had neuroimmunodeficiency syndrome, a disease with no cure, and her grandfather, Gerald Robotnik, built Shadow specifically to find one, an immortal life form meant to save a dying girl he loved more than anything else in the universe. Then the government shut the project down. Soldiers from a military organization called GUN stormed the Ark, and in the chaos, Maria was shot and killed the moment she managed to release Shadow from his cryogenic stasis tube to help him escape. Her last act was sealing him into an escape pod and asking him to give humanity a chance to be happy. Gerald was arrested, and what happened to him afterward is the part that turns a sad story into a horror story. Grief broke him completely. He reprogrammed the Ark's ultimate weapon, the very system built to protect the planet, and set it on a collision course with Earth itself. Not a metaphor for rage, an actual plan engineered by a mourning grandfather to annihilate the entire species that took his granddaughter from him, including the family members he still had left among them. Shadow was sealed away for 50 years after that night, waking up decades later still believing the destruction was Maria's dying wish, manipulated by a message his creator twisted before the end. It takes most of a game for him to learn the truth was closer to a suicide note aimed at an entire planet than a promise made to a child. A scientist's grief for one girl very nearly became a global execution, and the only reason it didn't was a hedgehog choosing, entirely on his own, not to finish what his creator started. Black Doom. Shadow was never told the whole deal Gerald Robotnik made to build him. Only part of it. The official story was always that Shadow was engineered to be the ultimate life form, an immortal cure-bearer built to save Maria. What that story leaves out is the ingredient list. Gerald didn't build Shadow from scratch, he built him using the blood of an alien warlord named Black Doom, in a bargain that made Shadow, biologically, that creature's son. 50 years later, Black Doom comes to collect. His species, the Black Arms, descends on Earth in a full invasion, tearing through cities and leaving Shadow with no memory of who he actually is, chasing the 7 Chaos Emeralds without knowing whether he's hunting them to save the planet or to hand his own father the key to conquering it. Black Doom trails him through the entire ordeal, insisting the whole time that this is simply the truth of what Shadow is, that his loyalty belongs with his own blood and not with the species that executed the girl he loved. An amnesiac soldier, quite literally hunted by his own bloodline, forced to decide in real time whether the creature he's fighting for humanity's survival against is also, somehow, his father. Here's the detail that makes it worse than a simple alien invasion plot. Gerald didn't strike that bargain out of desperation in some final act of grief. The deal for Black Doom's blood came before Maria ever died, folded into the same project meant to save her, meaning Shadow was built from a weapon of mass invasion for the exact same reason he was built to be a cure. 2 purposes stitched into one body from day one, and Shadow spends decades not knowing which one he actually is. Chaos. 3,000 years before Sonic ever ran a single step, Chaos was a Chao, a small, gentle creature living peacefully at a shrine guarded by the Knuckles clan. Its leader, Pachacamac, wanted more than peace. Under his rule, the clan had already fought a long, bloody border war against a rival Echidna tribe called the Nocturnus clan, led by Imperator Inks, a conflict that turned worse when the Nocturnus clan started fielding prototype robotic soldiers called Gizoids. Losing that war convinced Pachacamac that the Chaos Emeralds sealed at a nearby shrine were his only way to turn the tide, so he marched his warriors there to take them by force. His own daughter, Tikal, begged him not to go through with it. She ran ahead of the army to warn the Chao and put herself between her people and a slaughter she could already see coming. He trampled through her anyway. Tikal and the Chakayo, standing beside her, were cut down by Pachacamac's own soldiers, an act of violence against his daughter and a peaceful species that had never raised a hand against anyone in its existence. That single moment of cruelty is the entire origin of one of this franchise's most feared entities. The grief and fury of that massacre poured directly into Chaos, and using the very Chaos Emeralds Pachacamac had marched there to steal, it transformed into something monstrous. Perfect Chaos annihilated Pachacamac and every soldier who had followed him into that shrine. and then it kept going. It turned on the rest of the Knuckles clan and wiped out nearly the entire civilization in a single night. An ancient echidna society reduced to ruins by a creature that had been utterly peaceful right up until the moment it watched a massacre happen in front of it. Tikal, the one person who tried to stop the bloodshed before it started, ended up sacrificing herself to seal the very monster her father's cruelty had created, trapped together with it inside the Master Emerald for 3,000 years of silence. The burst of energy from that catastrophe was violent enough to tear a chunk of the world loose from the ground entirely, and that floating fragment became Angel Island, the very landmass Knuckles calls home. The handful of echidnas who survived the massacre didn't just mourn what Pachacamac had done. They chose, out of guilt, to spend the rest of their lives, and every generation after them, guarding the Master Emerald so that ambition like his could never happen again. Which means Knuckles isn't guarding that shrine because he wants to. He's the last living installment of a punishment his ancestors sentenced themselves to after a genocide, alone on a floating island because of a war he had no part in starting. A genocide born from one man's ambition, a monster born from that genocide, and a daughter spending 3 millennia imprisoned alongside the consequence of a massacre she begged her own father not to commit. Which of these theories disturbed you the most? Drop it in the comments.